Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 5 of my 2021 Valentine series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's Up With Love. So I've stamped out my images with Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to color the bunny first, and I started with E50 and E51. Added some shading in with that E51 first, and then I'm going to blend that out with the E50. I wasn't sure how dark I wanted to go with him, so I started out fairly light and thought that I could build up the color if I wanted a little bit more contrast there. So I'm blending everything out with that E50. I want to keep the area around the eyes nice and light. So I'm kind of creating little shadows there right above his eyes to kind of push that part of his face in a little bit deeper. So I did do a second layer on him just to beef up that saturation. And I decided to bring that color down toward his nose to kind of create a bridge there. And then I'm going to grab my colorless blender and kind of push back the area around the eyes a little bit more and create a little bit more roundness there, and also soften the area of his belly. And I also will color in his feet with those shades. But ultimately I decided that I did want a bit more contrast. He was just looking a little flat to me. So I'm going to pull in the E53 and I'm going to go over my shadowed areas once again, and already I'm liking that so much better. I'm also going to add a bit more shadow to the bridge of his nose, just accentuate that little area there. And then I'll go back down with my lighter two shades. So I'm using the E51 to blend out that E53 and still keeping some areas soft for that E50. And then I'll have the white areas around his eyes and his belly. So I just went over that with the colorless blender one more time. Then I'll move on to my bear, and for him I'm using E42, E43, and E44. So I'm going to start with that E44 and lay in some shadows. I'm going to draw in the area on the outside of his face to create that roundness. I'll also put a shadow across his chin where his arm is covering that, on the underside of his arms and the sides of his body, and the underside of his legs as well. Just creating that nice bit of depth there. And I'll also add a little bit of color to the bottom of his ears and his feet. And then I'm going to grab that E43 and I'm going to begin to blend that out. I'm going to make sure to go right over the very edge of that E44. I don't want to cover over it completely because that's going to break up that color too much. I just want to break up the edge of it and create that nice transition into this medium tone. So I'm just kind of doing little circular motions and trying to make him look nice and soft and furry. And I did have a little bit of a leak there, but not to worry. I just pulled off the other cap to equalize the pressure in the barrel of the marker, and I'm going to continue. Once that dries, I can clean that up. So now I'm taking that E42 and I'm going to fill in all of his face except for his muzzle and the rest of his body except the very tops of his hands. I wanted there to be an even softer highlight on those areas. So I'm going to pull in the E41 and bring that around to just the center of his muzzle, fill in his hands. I'll also add some shading to his belly with that marker. And then I'll grab the E40 and I'll blend out his belly and fill in his muzzle with that. So now that the leak has dried, I'm just going to go in with my colorless blender and push that color away. It's pretty easy to do with these lighter browns, and I'll also just clean up the toes again so that I can get them back to almost white. Then I'm hopping back over to the bunny's tail, and I'll use W00 and W1 to add a little shading to that. I'm doing a little dotting pattern to create a really fluffy look, And I did add in a little W3 too, just to make that a little bit darker. And then I want to color in the insides of their ears and the pads of their feet. So I'm going to use R00, R11, and R20 for that. So I colored in the inside of the bunny's ear with all 3 shades, and then just used the darker 2 for the pads of the feet because there wasn't much room there. And then I did the same thing with the bear's ears, but I used all 3 shades on the pads of his feet again, just because the area was big enough to squeeze that in. And for his toes, I started out with just the R00, but I didn't like the look of that, so I did go back and add a little of the R11 to that as well. And then I decided to give them both some rosy cheeks, so I'm using the R11 and then the R00 on the bunny, but for the bear, since he's a little bit of a darker color, I used the R20 and then the R11. So now I'm ready to tackle these balloons. So for the bunny's balloon, I'm using RV13, RV14, and RV17. And I'm starting with the RV17 and adding some shading down at the bottom of the balloon and kind of narrowing as I go up the sides. And then I added a bit of darkness in the crease at the top. And then I started to blend that out. I thought I had the RV14. I actually had the RV13 in my hand and didn't realize it. It also leaked on me. So I just pulled off the other end of the marker, and while I was doing that, I realized that I had the wrong one in my hand. So I colored over the RV13 with the RV14 and just kind of made that blend a little bit more smooth, and then filled in the rest of the space with the RV13. So then I'll move on to the bear's balloon, and for that I'm using R24, R29, and R39, and I'm going to color that pretty much the same, just adding that darkest shade at the bottom and kind of creeping up the sides and getting a little bit thinner as I go, and then adding a bit of darkness into that crease. So you may be wondering why I keep having issues with my markers bleeding. I've mentioned a few times that I recently refilled all of my markers. I didn't overfill them. What I think happened was that I replaced the caps on both ends too quickly. I had so many markers to do because I had put it off for so long. It took me 5 hours to refill and clean all of my markers, and I just hurried the process, I think, a little bit too much. So now I'm going to take a black Sakura Jelly Roll marker and go over the eyes of my critters to make them nice and bright and full of life again. And then I'll take a white Jelly Roll pen and kind of color over the little bit of a mess that I wasn't able to clean up, so that the die cut on the edge will still be nice and white. And then I'll trim these out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I wanted to use the outer frame from the Sunny Studio Fancy Frames rectangle. So I don't need the inner 2 pieces. I'm just going to use the outer piece for this particular card. I'm also going to use some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Sweet Talk collection. So I thought this cloud pattern was going to be perfect as the backdrop for my critters floating through the sky on their balloons. And then I wanted to choose a couple more patterns that I thought would go really well. I really liked this pale aqua with all the different colored hearts. I thought that was really pretty. And I'm just looking through for something that will match really well and look nice with those other 2 prints. So I'm going to flip back to this red. It's not really a polka dot. It's got like 4 little dots in a diamond shape. So I'm going to trim those down. And I trimmed the cloud print to fit right behind that frame. So I'm going to stamp my sentiment on that before I attach it. And I'm using the one that says "Love is in the air" because I thought that was just perfect for these adorable little images. And I stamped that down twice with VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it's so nice and crisp for sentiments. And then I'm going to create an insert for the inside of my card. So I'm going to stamp that in Lawn Fawn Guava ink. And I'm using the other two adorable critters in this set, the fox and the little bird, and the sentiment that says, "Sending you all the hearts." Now, I forgot to clean these before I stamped them because these were brand new, and so they've got a little residue from the manufacturer. So I'm going to use my Picket Fence Studios stamp scrubby to just clean those. It has like a little bit of a texture to it, so it cleans them really nice, and they stamp so much better after I use that. So I used that and then stamped down 2 more times just to make sure that I didn't have any more splotchiness. So I made a card base out of some guava cardstock from Lawn Fawn, and I just scored and folded that to a standard A2 size card with the top fold. I always make top fold cards, they're just my favorite. And that insert was trimmed down with the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables. For the pattern paper, I used the outer die from the Frilly Frames Quatrefoil set from Sunny Studio because I wanted that stitching detail, but I also wanted the pattern paper to fit over the entire front of the card. I didn't want any border of cardstock for this particular one. So I added the heart print to cover the entire card base, just made sure that that was nice and straight. And then I'm going to add this little red print going across the center horizontally. So then I'm going to take my cloud pattern paper that I've trimmed down, and I'm going to add a very thin bead of glue on the outside edge of that paper because there is barely any room for that to grab onto that frame. I didn't want any of that sticking out between the scallops, so I cut it pretty tight. And then I'm going to put that frame down right over top. I did have a little glue kind of splooge out on the left hand side at the top. So once that glue had dried, I just grabbed my Xyron adhesive eraser and removed that real quick and easy. And now I am ready to add my sweet little images. So I'm going to start with the bunny, and I'm going to add her over in the top right hand side. And I don't know why she's a girl now. I know I probably called it him earlier. I guess maybe because of the pink balloon. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm adding her over in the top right, and then I'll take my little bear and I'm going to put him down in the bottom left corner. And I just love the way these are drawn, and giving them just a little bit of a tilt as well just creates so much movement in that scene. And I don't know, I just love it. And I did purposely allow them to kind of overlap the edge of that frame just a little bit. And then I wanted to add just a bit more detail to that focal panel. So I'm taking the solid heart that is included in this stamp set, and I'm stamping that a couple of times on the background using some Lawn Fawn Wild Rose ink. And that ink looks a little splotchy when you first stamp it, but it evens out as it dries. So I added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of that panel to give it a little bit of dimension on the card. So I'm going to line that up in the center and then press that down into place. And then I had these little iridescent hearts from Studio Katia that I just thought would be perfect for this card. So I sprinkled a few into my Twiddler's Nook cloud embellishment tray, and then I'm going to add a few dabs of glue here and there on my card, trying to use very little glue so it doesn't kind of squish out because these little hearts are so tiny. And then I'm using my Studio Katia embellishment wand to pick those up out of my tray and pop them down in place right over top of the glue. So I love that it has that kind of sticky end and the little metal end, so you can, maneuver your little embellishments if they aren't quite straight the first time. So I'm just going to keep working and adding a few more here and there. I didn't want to overdo it, so I just did a few at a time until I had a look that I was happy with. So I'm going to add just a couple more, and I got a bit too much glue on that one. So I'm going to use the back of that wand once again to kind of pick up a little bit of that and remove it. And then I'll add another little heart. And then I'll use the little notch in my tray to dump the rest of those hearts into the container and set that off to the side. So now I'm going to add a little bit of stickles just to add some more glitter, because you know how much I love this stuff. I just can't hardly seem to make cards without using it, very rarely, but I just love the look of it. So I added it to the 2 heart balloons and to the bunny's ear and tail and the pads of his feet, and then the inside of the bear's ears and the pads of his feet as well. And there you can see how that stickles and those iridescent hearts really catch the light and just look so pretty. And there is another peek at the inside. So I have to say, I absolutely love how this one turned out. I think those images are so sweet, and that pattern paper is the perfect match. So if you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I use, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 videos from previous years of Valentine card series that I thought you might also enjoy. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.